Welcome to the CMO Spotlight. And I am absolutely thrilled today to have Thomas Winstanley, who is the EVP and General Manager at Edible Brands. More specifically, he's focused on edibles.com within Edible Brands. So, welcome, Thomas.
Joe, thank you so much for having me. Love chatting with you as always.
Absolutely. So, first, let's just start with the company because many
Yeah,
of us know edible brands because of edible arrangements, the fruit bouquets that you can send for various occasions. But I know that you were brought on to run edibles.com, which is a division
yeah,
of Edible Brands. So can you just tell us more about the structure of the company?
for sure. As part of the Edible Brands family, they had IP around the term edibles, and this goes back well before cannabis legalization really started, and it took a very different term. It took a very different connotation socially back when Tarek Fareed, the founder, initially had secured some of this IP. And as time has gone on, with the rise of legalization in recreational cannabis to the 2018 Farm Bill with hemp-derived THC products, there was an interest to come into this space. And before I joined in 2019, they had tried a CBD project and it had started and it didn't really get traction. They had tried it again, I think, in like 2019, 2021. It didn't really get traction. And then back in 2024, I was connected with the group here, and I was former CMO for one of the largest privately owned cannabis companies in the Northeast. And they'd come to me saying, we have edibles.com and we want to build a business around this. Are you interested? And originally, I think like a lot of people were like, what business does the strawberry company have with these products? And what was really interesting in the course of conversation with them about strategy and approach and comfort was we were all aligned on a core concept of how do you create healthy access to THC? How do we move
Mhm.
beyond these stigmas of the category from the Nancy Reagan era, just say no? These things are so much more, these products are so much more. How do we leverage this type of IP into a thoughtful way of building a category? And so I joined in July of 2025, I think,
Mhm.
and sorry, 2024 rather.
Mhm.
And I spent about 9 months building, not telling anybody that I was working on this. Nobody knew what it was going to be. And there was just, to Edible Brands' credit, there was so much support, trust, and enthusiasm around how I wanted to approach this, which really aligned with what they wanted, which was let's do this in a really responsible, respectful way to create meaningful avenues for consumers to access these products where today, they're sold in gas stations and liquor stores. How is health tied to this? How did we revert that stigma and build um, a place where consumers could shop with trust, safety, and validation that these products are not what you used to know. And that was one of the most unique business propositions in my entire career to hear this
Mhm.
from somebody. And I immediately went from skepticism into we're going to do this and this is going to be
Yeah.
something very different. And it
the
has
the
been so far.
possibilities are endless now at this point too in terms of
Yeah.
extensions. Like we'll get into this a little more, but I know you just opened your first retail store, so it's not
Yeah.
just an e-commerce piece online, it's also retail and such. So your title is EVP and General Manager. I know it's not a marketing specific title, but
Yeah.
I know you have a marketing background, and that was
Yeah.
your point just a minute ago. You spent time as the chief marketing officer for
Yeah.
a large cannabis company. So I'm curious, in your role as EVP and general manager, what does that mean? Is that mean you have to
Yeah.
sweep up the retail store when the day is done, in addition to everything else you do?
I honestly was wiping down windows the night before our
Right,
launch
right,
and
right.
honestly cleaning baseboards. So I will do anything. So,
Yeah.
my role is kind of interesting. So I report directly to our CEO, and really I have a lot of autonomy and oversee our marketing, our e-commerce, our media, um, our supply chain. I really,
Wow.
kind of get to oversee the totality of the business. And, for me, marketing is one of the most important things in this category because we are up against a lot of, this is federally legal, hemp products are federally legal,
Right.
but your traditional avenues for marketing don't exist here. So, Meta and Google and PPC and all of this stuff, you have to work within a very tight framework of legal parameters and FTC
Mhm.
guidelines that, selling on the strawberry side of the business, on the edible arrangement side, like they don't have to deal with this. And so
Yeah.
one of the core tenets for me was building a brand that one was accessible, that didn't feel like you're buying cannabis, that doesn't feel like
Right.
you're buying a regulated good, but at the same time being very cognizant of the laws that exist today and are changing. And so I actually always start kind of with, I actually look at brand development, and especially when I was working on this, which was, let's not start with a creative brief in the traditional way you would.
Hmm.
Let's start with what we want the case study to be about this business. Let's work backwards.
Yeah.
And
What's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? And then we can go back and say, here's the problem, and here's what our solution was to the problem.
I had a really talented creative director when I was working in New York. And that's how we started every brand development project was he would actually take us through a mock-up article about the
Mm,
brand that we were about to work on. And he would say, this is the criteria of what we want to have. This is the
mm,
headline, subtext, and then, 4 paragraphs, and say, what does the brand need to do to achieve this? And we kind of started in that arena. And what I really loved about a brand like this is, we were talking a little bit before the call where there are a lot of avenues where an edibles.com can go. Obviously, you start with native e-commerce, and then you also have, is there last mile? Is there retail? And are there products at some point? So how do you start building an architecture and a creative brand identity that can move? That's not just
hmm.
one thing. And then how can you also have these things be marketed in ways that will have to be able to negotiate these channels? And so that was really where I think probably some of my strength in this category is I know this landscape really, really well. I know a lot of these brands that are successful, and I know why some of these brands are successful. And I really want to start to distill that into how do you make a great brand? And I think you have to have a really good identity. You have the name, but one of the things I told them was the name is not going to make you successful.
Right, right. It's
It
just a URL.
helps.
I mean, it's
It's
just
just
a
a
good URL.
URL. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a great URL. And like, to be successful, you have to make something that, yeah, that helps, but you need so many other things
yeah.
to work well to be successful. And that's really what I targeted in terms of strat planning and brand development and identities and who our consumers are, the products we want to carry. And again, I started with where do we want to be in 3 years? What is that headline?
And you had to make some decisions too about like how closely do we tie to edible brands and edible arrangements
Yeah.
and edibles, and you haven't been shy. Like I see on because I've been on the site a couple of times, I get retargeted with marketing, and you're like, yes, we're part of the edible brands family. Yes, we're the
Yeah.
same company that brings you a bouquet full of fruit are the
Yeah.
same company that can bring you your THC drinks or gummies and such.
Hmm.
And we talked a little bit about the support that you've gotten from your the
Yeah.
larger parent company and executive leadership team has been such that they see the value in this being a new category and they trust you to help them launch in the new category given your experience.
Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of like an ongoing conversation. I think when we first started, there were so many unknowns about what was the core audience of Edible Arrangements reception going to be of this type of business under this parent company.
Hmm.
Was there going to be friction? Was there going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul in terms of brand optics? And I think one thing that helped me build some of that trust internally was knowing that they know me at this point where I don't want edibles.com to be successful because of all of this other stuff.
Right.
I want the business to be successful because it deserves to be successful because it is a good business.
It sounds like spoken like a true like younger brother. I think it sounds like
Yeah, I'm the youngest of three, so like
I
I have
know,
I have lived this,
right?
countless
I
times.
don't want to be successful because my brothers were super successful. I want to be
Yeah,
successful because I showed that I can do it.
yeah, and that's kind of, I think, it's one thing to say that, but I think we've really shown that where,
Hmm.
we've been really cognizant to not, leverage the equity of one to fill the other. Like, even if we try not to be associated, there's still an association, and that's actually good enough for me. We're not always, there's a couple of ads where, yeah, like I talk about we're part of the Edible Arrangements family, like we're part of that same group, but we're not going out and telling customers, like we're not saying like, oh, with us because we sell strawberries. Like I talk about that because it's real, but I really wanted to make sure that this business, I didn't want to do a business that was going to succeed and ride coattails of another business. I want to make businesses that succeed because the idea is right, the brand is right, the products are
Hmm.
right, the experience is right. And, and I think my peers on the executive team, they really respect that,
Yeah.
because they also know that there's a lot of this industry that they don't know, and they trust me in that. But I still go to them and say, hey, I have this like thing I have to figure out. How does this sound to you? Because if one thing that I really benefit from is this is an independently owned 25-year-old company that has seen a lot. This is a brand that I'm starting that is less than a year old.
Yeah.
And there's an economy of scale and business that they have that I don't have, that I try to hydrate from intellectually and from a strategy perspective, from a retail perspective, from a consumer perspective. And so, those doors are always open to me, and I walk in them when I need to. And I also at times, don't, and just
Yeah.
say like, sometimes these things, there's sometimes an incompatibility in terms of how to approach certain things. And so that helps, I think that has really helped along the journey for me.
Yep. And I think what you're saying too is that sometimes you can walk into a meeting and be Thomas Winstanley of edibles.com, and sometimes you can be Thomas Winstanley of edible brands. And
Correct.
depends on context, like what's appropriate for the situation,
Yeah.
and and to be able to flex the muscle of edible brands sometimes and then
Yeah.
step away from it at other times.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's like going to an institution where you have incredible professors all around you, right? It's like our chief legal officer. Of all of the dynamics, I have probably one of the closest executive dynamics with our chief legal officer because so much of what we do is legal,
Hmm.
is compliance, regulatory, and it's interesting to see kind of how a lot of these relationships have evolved. And I think now that I'm coming up on 2 years here, I have great relations with all these folks, and I always have. But I think now, they've kind of seen the output of what I'm building and how I'm approaching things, and I may not always be doing things the edible way, but I think there's a
Hmm.
trust that if I diverge from the traditional path, that that's okay because there's probably a reason for it, and it's not that there's a right and a wrong. It's more of a we know how to work interchangeably and when to ask for support and guidance, and also just be really transparent about some of the things that we have to do. That again, this industry is very atypical. You cannot look at this from a traditional CPG lens all of the time because you have things like compliance audits and regulatory reviews and payment
Mm,
payment processor requirements and all of these different things. And there's a lot of scrutiny on a type of business like this that you're not getting elsewhere. But a lot of the success I have to give to edible brands for their courage to be able to do this. We are one of
yeah,
the only national brands, national companies in this category that's not alcohol.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that is a testament to this group.
yeah. Well, I remember when Tilray, which is the largest cannabis company in Canada,
Yep.
acquired Sweetwater, which is a local brand here in Atlanta,
Yeah.
now a regional, beer brand, and that 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 made sense, right? Like that aligned with certainly with the Sweetwater brand when their best selling product was called 420, for example.
Yeah. A
But
great beer, by the way. It's still a
yeah,
great beer.
it
Still a
is,
great beer.
and they have a lot of other beers that are great too beyond just
Yeah.
the 420. But I'll just say that like that made for a very natural
Yeah.
combination, whereas people are it's a little more of a stretch for some people to think I'm buying a fruit bouquet for my grandmother for her birthday, and I'm also buying THC for
Yeah.
because I've got achy joints or I can't sleep well. And that's one of the things we can talk about too is the
Yeah.
positioning of edibles.com has been really focused on health. I think even your tagline is health not high.
Yeah.
And it's the idea that we've talked about, could you the beer brands, that if you drink enough beer, you're going to get drunk, but that's not really the positioning or messaging that they
Correct.
they either want to do or are allowed to do. And it's
Right.
the same thing with your product in that, you know, could you get high from consuming these products? Yes. Is that the sole purpose for consuming the product? Absolutely not.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is actually that was one of the strategic North Stars that I very quickly grasped onto in talking with Tara Consomia about this was I started my career, in pharmaceuticals. I then moved into CPG healthcare products. I then moved into alcohol and then ended up in cannabis. And I've always been a cannabis guy. And for me, cannabis and THC has always been this wellness product.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of what hemp is today is focused around health and wellness. And I think we've when I look at the range of the category today, I actually gravitate when I look at like the landscape of the future of CPG, THC, it's really around functional based wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a guy who's like a tennis player. I run, I mean, I do all of the things that, I'm supposed to do to maintain, a healthy lifestyle. Cannabis really integrates with that.
Mm-hmm.
And for so long, we've always thought about cannabis as something that is bad for you. It is bad for your health, from a psychological perspective to a physical wellness. And so, part of the creative brief for me on all of this was how do we move away from this
Yeah.
and how do we show that it's not just getting high? And I'm glad you brought up the alcohol thing because one of the I worked on Remy Martin for, their North American portfolio for about 2 years in New York. We ran their entire portfolio. And I remember being on a TV shoot and you could show
Oh, the
somebody drinking the
consuming that
product.
product. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I do a lot of lobbying today too around this category. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that alcohol doesn't market getting drunk. Like they that is a byproduct of drinking
Right,
alcohol.
right, right.
I feel the same way about THC, where I don't need to market getting high because it's somewhat implicit, but
Yeah,
it's a choice.
right.
And that's where I loved the moniker Health Not High. Like, funny joke, I didn't realize when they first told me they had this IP. I at first stuck my nose up at it and I was like, "Whoa, whoa, are we really going to be
Right.
take this line?" But as we really became more entrenched, I was like, "Yeah, well, actually, this is an amazing kind of symbolic thing that we're saying about this, where we are saying the quiet part out loud, which is this is health, this is not getting high." And it's the same thing with like supplements. If you take too much melatonin or magnesium or creatine or caffeine, you're going to have adverse outcomes.
Yeah.
Our job is to help promote responsible, smart, and effective use of these products. And that's really where, I think as I look down the road at where the category goes, that's the reinforcement aspect of marketing that I try to hit on, whether it's educating on like CBD is an amazing cannabinoid that, for a long time, CBD was everywhere in 2019 and 2020,
Hmm.
but you actually need a little bit of THC to get the full impact of what CBD's functional outcomes are. And when I go through our portfolio, I'm constantly looking at products today that when I was in the cannabis industry, I would have never considered.
Hmm.
And
Because the
I
goal was high, not health.
correct. And like I'm a low dose kind of guy now. I got two kids. I'm old. Like I
Yeah,
I don't have what I used
same.
to have, like.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is that, when I look at what our products are today in our store or online to what we would sell in dispensaries, 5 milligram products of just pure THC, yeah, those did okay, but people wanted high dose stuff. You know, Mixtures of CBD and CBN and CBG, nobody would spend their time making low dose products because that's not what people going to dispensaries were looking for. They were
Hmm.
looking for the high.
Yeah.
And hemp has allowed for entrepreneurs to make a new product class of these different types of chews or beverages that, I don't think regulated markets would ever spend the time on. And
Yeah.
I've been more impressed by the innovation in the hemp sector than I have in the cannabis industry because of the diversity of health related outcomes. And so
Hmm.
that's been another very interesting part of the journey. And that also is getting reflected in our roadmap for new products that are coming on board.
Yeah. Knowing that there's a combination of ingredients that make for the right experience that you're looking to solve
Yeah.
for.
You don't
Um,
need to sell the high. You don't need to sell the
right.
high.
Right. People that want that will find that. But that's okay. I got a couple other questions because we veered off of the marketing aspects of things. But
Yeah, of
before we get
course.
there, I'm curious if there's a piece of advice that you either wish you'd gotten earlier in your career, or maybe you'd give to somebody that's new to the marketing profession. Um,
Yeah. Um, I think when it comes to marketing, I think it's always really important for any marketers to embrace doing things with uncertainty. I think a lot of times the door of safety is always there in terms of comfort level. And I think it's really important to always challenge ourselves to be able to go outside of what is comfortable to us into areas where if your instinct is telling you something, but it doesn't maybe feel as safe, it's okay to do that. And I think the other big piece of advice that I have learned over my career is keep a really high batting average. I am not a big ideas guy. It may seem like it. This whole thing is a big idea, but like I try to make sure that my technical infrastructure and marketing infrastructure is really strong
mhm.
because you have to earn taking big shots. You can't come out of the gate swinging. I've said this to my teams since probably for the last decade. I will take somebody who's got a 400 batting average over somebody who hits a lot of home runs
Yeah.
because that's how you win ball games. And so, risk tolerance is one thing, and then also making sure your fundamentals are really good. Earn big swings. You don't get them right out of the gates.
Hmm. So I believe everybody has a superpower, and I'm curious what you feel your superpower is.
Oh man. Um, I I think a little bit of my superpower is being able to distill different ideas. Um, I I like to hear a lot of ideas, but then I'm also really confident in making a determination on what ideas go forward.
Hmm.
Um, there are no bad ideas in any of my meetings, but I have a really good ability to distill all of those and then to come to an outcome. I
Hmm.
do not like to, with rare exception, will I want to think about something for a few weeks and then come to a decision. I really like to hear a lot of different inputs and then come to a point of clarity and direction. And then I have this ability to say, once we're going to do something, like Sun Tzu's Art of War, once you invade an enemy, burn your boats because there's no turning back.
Yeah.
And so I try to be very definitive and operate with clarity that distills a lot of information into something. And
Mm,
that's not just with marketing, that's also with policy, regulation, everything. I like to try to distill as much as possible and then come to an actionable outcome. And I think a lot of people can get caught in the churn and that decision-making process.
yeah. All right. I'm writing down good chooser, right?
Yeah,
Ultimately, good chooser.
I hope so. Like my
Right.
instincts have served me well, like to date. So, I get stuff wrong all the time, but I also know that even if I get something wrong, I will leverage that input to get it right the next time I'm presented with a similar occasion.
Makes sense. So at Setup, we're marketing matchmakers and we connect brands and marketing agencies together. And so we live in that space between. We're not on the client side, and we're also not on the agency side, but we have this unique position to really understand the difference between the two and the relationship between the two. So I'm curious, just generally, how you like to work with marketing agencies. Obviously, the actual marketing you do is a little different than it would be if you weren't in a
Totally.
highly regulated industry. But just generally, how do you
Yeah.
like to work with agencies?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I will say, I appreciate that disclosure where it's like we're in a little bit of a different box. The way I actually work with agencies today is I put them almost on in the same way when you hire an employee and you have like a 90-day review and evaluation, I do the same thing.
Mm,
Um, I do a lot of 90-day agreements because I am very much a test, find performance, and commit.
mhm.
And I have gone through a handful, I'll be honest, a handful of paid agencies because paid is really hard. Um,
Paid social, paid search, that kind of thing. Yep.
yeah, and I think I'm always very cognizant of people thinking they're always going to have a magic bullet. I actually go through, a 90-day of like, okay, we're going to run you for 90 days. I want to see the performance. And I want to, everything you're saying, I believe that you can do it. Show me you can do it in 90 days.
Mhm.
And that to me is a constant testing period to then get into longer term agreements. That's mostly on the paid side. On, something that's more of a fixed partnership like a development firm or a web agency or something like that, that to me is a little bit more of, yeah, I'll go into a 6-month agreement or, so on and so
Right.
forth. Here's the roadmap that I want to hit. Here are my priorities. You tell me where I'm missing my priorities. Where are the things that I'm not saying that we need to do that you're telling me we need to do? Let's try to find the gap there. On the creative end, we actually don't work with any outsourced creative agencies at this point. Um, I've been fortunate to work with a great partner named Matt Dubord, who I've worked with for years. Actually, our web agency as well. They just kind of came on board at the start of this year to help on this project. But what I'm always looking for is specifically on paid media is I do like to have everything is kind of a test run and everything's a
Mhm.
little bit of like, and I think part of it is I have a hard time accepting anything short of what is being told to me in terms of performance. I'm also
Mhm.
not in a place where I want to be a test subject. Um,
Right.
I've met with a lot of agencies that are in the paid space who are like, hey, we'll do it for free. And I'm like, but I don't want to be your guinea pig because I need
Right.
performance
Right.
and
Right.
I don't want to be the beta test that you could put on a resume at some point and say,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
done hemp stuff. So um, it's a lot of trial and error. And I think that's the nature of a new industry.
Yeah, I'm curious. I've asked this question of we've done 115 or something of these CMO spotlights, and the answer has always varied wildly from company to company. Are
Yeah.
there certain functions that you feel are core to the business that you always want to keep in-house? And are there certain other functions or disciplines of marketing that you really
Such a good
want to get
question.
outside perspective because you're like, hey, they either have special expertise or external creative perspective that we don't have because we're too close to it.
This is an amazing question, Joe.
Thanks.
I always, because so much of my background has been design,
Mm,
I always have tried to keep design close.
Mm.
And mostly because I have so much experience in this category that having an outsider who's not in the category living in the category, I have a very clear vision of what I want and how I want it to feel and how I want it to exist. And that's just a little bit of my core strength, right? I know how to design. I'm an Illustrator guy, a Photoshop guy. I
Hmm.
love Figma, and I'm a hands-on guy,
Yeah.
where I'm always looking for support is actually more on the technical side, on
Hmm.
Shopify native development or paid media. And that's where I kind of try to build my teams around my weaknesses. And that's where I
Yeah.
love to hire people who will tell me, again, if I say, here are my three priorities this quarter, are these right? And then having them come back to me and be like, this is half right. I think this is probably more important. So I would definitely say on, development, web, e-commerce, a lot of that stuff. I'm a broad strokes kind of guy. I like having that expertise. Paid media, that's something that, I haven't actually even been able to spend a lot of money in my past around that side. And I've also gotten burned a lot on that side. And so,
Hmm.
when I look at it, I'm like, okay, how do I play my weaknesses as a leader of this business? I try to keep creative really close. That's not to say, though, every once in a while, I do like to do spec briefs with people. If I'm going to say, like, a good example, if I'm about to go make packaging and we're going to make products, which is part of our roadmap, that might be something I kick outside
Yeah.
to say, I don't want this.
Yeah.
I want to see somebody come from left field on this
Right.
thing
Right.
and
Right.
see where I can go. But when it comes to the core native brand stuff, where I'm like, I'm really comfortable with edibles.com kind of ecosystem today for design. I don't necessarily need to farm that out.
Yeah.
I want to look at, I don't want to get trapped in the marketer's dilemma where you think you know everything. That's where I love to have outside perspective. So I play it a little differently based on the subcontext of the aspect of the business that is revenue driving as it relates to marketing.
Makes total sense. I'm curious if there's a program or a campaign uh, from either your past or maybe a current one from Edibles that taught you a great deal, either because it was a flop and you learned a valuable lesson
Yeah.
you really needed, or it was a huge success and you'd like to emulate that success again in the future.
Yeah. So there was, I mean, I'm a guy who's got a lot of failures and a lot of wins, and I think, like, to varying degrees. I will say one project that really served me into this role was when I was at my former company, we were vertically integrated cannabis. So we had licenses in, 7 states. I had 18 dispensaries under it. One of the ideas that I had was when we were opening one of the last dispensaries, we had this massive sprawling building, and we had a beverage in-house beverage brand called High Five that was doing really, really well. And this was kind of as beverages were coming up in regulated markets, even in hemp at the same time. And a project I did that I will always hold near and dear that translated to just last week was I opened the first beverage only dispensary ever.
Hmm.
And what I did was is I created a 600 square foot dispensary next to our main dispensary. It was like the same building,
Yeah.
one entrance for a high five beverage only dispensary that was 500 square feet, and it was
Hmm.
only beverages. And this was one of the biggest risks of my career. And it ended up failing.
Hmm.
But there was so much that was right about it that as I actually came here and started working on retail here, I was like, I want less than 1,000 square feet. I want
Hmm.
small, intimate, personal. I
Yeah.
want something that feels like a bodega. And in some ways, that high five dispensary, which the doors have since closed on,
Yeah.
actually set me up to come do this thing
Yeah.
where that is now the blueprint for my retail with edibles.com.
Yep. And I know in terms of form factor, obviously, just focusing on one form factor may not be ideal. And, because obviously with hemp derived THC products, they come in every form factor you could imagine, from
Correct.
energy drink with it in there to gummies to all kinds
Yeah,
of other form factors. But that's amazing. All right, I've got a couple of rapid fire questions
yeah,
just
love
to
it.
wrap things up. So first is there a movie or quote, a book or a quote or a sports team or a band that inspires you, and what is it that inspires you about that thing?
Yeah, so can I give two answers on this
Yeah,
one?
please.
Okay, so we were talking earlier. I am a huge listener to the Acquired podcast that goes into the history of
Mm,
businesses. As we were talking about earlier, the Costco history, the podcast by Acquired about Costco, that thing has been that 3 hour podcast has been living rent free in my brain as I've been building this. Every Acquired episode goes through the history of a lot of the brands that I love today and some of the brands I never knew of. That lives rent free. I think actually a piece of literature that I constantly go back to is a book called The Splendid and the Vile, which is the history of the bombing of London in World War II
mhm.
and Churchill's kind of grappling with these times of uncertainty and how to be a really great leader in a time where failure is inevitable. I go back to, I'm opening like weed stores here, so the stakes are much lower, but his ability to navigate the complexities of the time
Mhm.
was really, really sits with me in terms of what a real leader should be.
I love that. Okay, I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm going to strike Costco from the list of answers. But what brand have you never worked on that you admire the most, and what is it about that brand that you admire so much?
Oh man. A brand that I would say there is a pencil company called Blackwing, and
Hmm.
I love everything about their packaging, their design, their
Hmm.
as an instrument, it's great. I still write a lot of things down. I think they are a brand that is going to be around forever. I think it's one of those 100-year brands that they didn't build a
Wow.
better mousetrap, but I think the quality of the product is just so amazing. And every time I like hate to say I'm like been holding one of these things, I think that product and this company is actually an amazing company, and
Wow.
they somehow continue to get better. And there's something about the tactile utilitarian nature that I still personally love. And I use it on my blotter and I write notes with it and I interact with it every day. And it's still analog tech that
Wow.
is functional and has an outcome. And yeah, I think I love the brand personally. And Blackwing, if you're out there and you listen to this, let's do a partnership at some point.
Yeah, well, you could do some interesting collaborations. It's interesting. Like, do you have a special sharpener for for these pencils? Like, how do
I
you sharpen
do.
these?
I do
Yeah.
actually. It's one that my son picked out for me that it's like I'm looking at it. It's like a goofy robot that my son I went to go buy a pencil sharpener at Target and I told my son pick one out for me and he picked a robot one out that
Yeah,
I just
a
love it.
hand crank, not electric.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a hand crank. And so yeah, there's like I have some existential coincidence with pencils and I used to be a writer and so it's just something that
I saw
I maintain.
you were an English major in college, but with some design sense. So that makes you dangerous as a creative
A
person,
little bit, yeah.
but both design and writing. But but it seems only fitting that you would use a analog, hand crank sharpener for these pencils.
Yeah.
Um, okay, last question to wrap things up. Outside of your family, which is an easy option, where do you find joy outside of work?
Um, playing tennis.
Mm,
Um, playing tennis, and honestly, I use the products when I play, and it's a way to disconnect. It's a flow state type of thing where when I step onto a tennis court and I go through the practice of tying my shoes and regripping my racket and just
hmm
hitting tennis balls, it's the only time maybe in my life that I let go of everything and I just am
mm.
really present and I'm in the moment and um yeah, I just relinquish those times, especially as a young dad of like a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Like being able to let go of everything is really hard. But when I'm on the tennis court, it's almost like a little my own little bubble, and I love it.
I love that too. Well, so Thomas Winstanley is the EVP and General Manager of Edible Brands, particularly focused on the growth of edibles.com. Thomas, this was such a joy. Thank you so much for spending this
Oh,
time with me.
Joe, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on.